Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jim Kleiber Show. Today is Tuesday, January 26th. I hopefully will have a better video quality today. I finally got an Ethernet cable that could run from upstairs down to the basement and an adapter because I have an Apple computer to get the Ethernet cable to work. So hopefully that will provide a better video quality for the show. But who knows? If not, then there are other problems that I will have to resolve that I'm not aware of yet. I didn't do a show yesterday. I was questioning whether to do one today because I've been thinking about something over the weekend as there's a new app that's out that's called Clubhouse. It's been out since, I'd say, probably April or March of last year, but it was invite only, and so it started out very slowly, and then the thing with giving everyone one or two invites is that it's exponential, and then quickly it gets very large very fast. And I think they also put out more invites in general. They want it to grow more quickly. So it's growing. It's on iPhone right now. It'll be on Android soon, I guess, and maybe on the web as well. I have some type of web interface, desktop interface. But it got me thinking. It was valued at $1 billion based on the second investment round it received, the Series B. And it got me thinking a lot about the addictive nature of business, or rather, the products and companies that seem to be valued very highly are often the ones that make us the most addicted. I was thinking about, okay, if I'm going to invest in something, what would I invest in? Oh, I would invest in something that people can either get really addicted to or people become really dependent on, which in a way is not so different. And so if you think about some of the largest companies that have existed in the world, take GM. It's something very close to my heart. My dad worked there his whole career. Once somebody has a car, once cities are built around a car, we become dependent on them. It's very hard to live without a car in many parts of the United States. Like very, very difficult. There can be some public transportation, but especially in the suburbs, there's very little public transportation. And also the cities are built around people having cars. And so there's almost this dependency that gets built into it. So that's one thing we can become dependent on. We can also become really dependent on the oil, right, to run the cars or to run other things. And so we can get really dependent on oil. If there's no oil, if there's no gasoline, what do we do? So much shuts down. It's not just personal transportation. It's business transportation. It's the logistics and shipping of so many things that we need and that we want, that we're also dependent on. And then if you look at some tech companies like Facebook, for example, some people have built their whole businesses on Facebook. So they're very, very dependent on Facebook or eBay or some other online platform where people are doing their business that way. And so if the platform disappears or if they get kicked off the platform, it could really impact their income and impact their family and impact their ability to pay rent or pay a mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so there's that dependency aspect, if you think about it. So on Clubhouse right now, a lot of people are just using it, kind of have conversations, meet with each other. But as people use it more and more, and if they come up with ways to monetize it, then people can become dependent on it, not just for the kind of the consumer side, where like dependent on having the app so that I can meet and talk with people and meet people I've never met before, et cetera, but also dependent from the producer side, where if it goes away, my income goes away. My whole business has been built here. And so, yeah, I mean, what do they call it? Dependent, or they call it addicted, or they call it sticky. I mean, there's lots of words that are used in business. I'm typically not addicted, typically sticky or repeat customers or moat or well, typically moat is to prevent people from the outside coming in, but the moat also prevents the people from the inside going out. So there are two benefits to that, at least from the business standpoint. And so it got me thinking a lot about how much I've had an aversion to getting people dependent on something that I've built, even getting people dependent upon me. Because when people are dependent on something that I've built, or when people are dependent on me and only me, that means, frankly, it means I have a lot of responsibility. That means it's not a very robust system. If something happens to me, the whole thing falls apart. I remember when I was building iFilio, I intentionally made it so people wouldn't get addicted, or at least I tried to make it so people wouldn't get addicted or dependent on it. People say, oh, put in notifications, put in stuff. No, I don't want people to get addicted. I want people to use it when they need to use it, for how long they need to use it. And when they're done, they've learned the lesson, and then they can move on. I want them to learn from this. Ideally, I didn't want to have a phone for the rest of my life. I wanted to use iFilio so that I could get better at expressing how I felt, even when I were in the jungle or in the middle of nowhere with no phone. I didn't want to have to rely on the phone to be able to communicate how I was feeling and to interact with my life. I wanted to use it so I got good, so I could step away from the phone. But from a business model, that's what, give somebody a product that they use just for a few weeks or months, and then once they're done with it, they never use it again. I mean, it can work if you have really, high prices up front and you're very good at getting new customers. But they say in business, it's very hard to get new customers. A lot of times it's much easier just to keep the same customers and just upsell them, sell them more products, and keep them in the ecosystem and to keep them paying. So, there was another person online who created an app very similar to iFilio. I think it was called Quirk. Quirk, it was like a CBT app. So CBT means cognitive behavioral therapy. And I really loved the app just because it had very similar principles to how I was, the ones I was using to design iFilio, in terms of being minimalist, being private, being very simple. And at some point, the creator of that pivoted and started a different business, I think with his brother, because he had similar realizations that he built a product for him that worked for him. And over time, he got better and didn't need to use the product, didn't feel dependent on the product as much anymore. And then the same thing was happening with the customers, And so it was hard to make a business model that would continue to go and to continue to generate revenue. And so I've been thinking about this, and it's one of the main reasons I didn't do a show yesterday, is because I was thinking, do I really want people? Well, one, it's almost like I have to get people dependent on something, or something sticky, or have people keep coming back or repeat, or whatever, frankly, euphemism you want to use for addiction, or deep attachment. And it's like I almost have to do that for relationships, for business, to generate revenue and things like this. And I was asking myself, well, how do I want to do that then? If it is something that I have to do, how do I want to do it? What do I want people to be dependent on? And I don't know if I want people to be reliant or dependent or repeat or constantly or addicted or whatever level of attachment you want to describe it to me talking for 30 minutes a day. It seems like a lot of time. It seems like a lot of, especially if people are watching it, screen time. I don't necessarily want people addicted to looking at their screens. It's probably one reason that I don't tweet too much. I go on Twitter and I like things and I read things, but I rarely will tweet too much. I think part of it is I don't want to hook people on that platform. I myself struggle with this idea of feeling addicted to Instagram or Twitter or other things online, and I don't necessarily want to pull more people into that. Side note, that's another reason why some of these platforms are valued very highly, and can generate a lot of money, because not only does the platform pull people in, but the platform gives a platform to other people to pull other people in, right? To keep them hooked. So we may not be hooked to Facebook, or we may not be hooked to Instagram, but we are hooked to a specific person on Facebook, or a specific person or group on Instagram. And so therefore, that's what gets us hooked. It's like it's like drugs on top of drugs. which is fine, because these are legalized drugs. We don't like other drugs. We only like drugs that we can make money off of, apparently. This was a whole conversation I had a couple years back, just looking at the different types of drugs that we use in the US, and what's legal and what's not legal, and why is it legal and why is it not legal. It just seemed to me that nicotine, alcohol, and caffeine are all legal drugs, whereas like marijuana wasn't at the time, and like cocaine and many of these aren't. And what was the other one? Khat was a drug it's like popular in East Africa or the Middle East, or the Gulf. And yeah, it wasn't because one was necessarily more dangerous or more addictive. Caffeine is super addictive, and nicotine is highly, highly addictive. And but they're still legal. And I think they're legal because we make money off of them. We make a lot of money off of that. So yeah. And same with alcohol. But so when it comes to what do I want to get people addicted to, if I think of it in kind of those extreme terms, what do I want people to get addicted to? It wouldn't be necessarily 30 minutes of me talking. Maybe it's just me talking for 2 or 3 minutes a day, like a quick little update, like a voice note. It's actually more maybe getting people addicted to training and different learning exercises, where it's more active learning and less the passive learning. Because I think while you could listen to me here, and you can pick up on how I communicate, and maybe you learn to communicate in a similar way to how I'm communicating, you might learn faster. And if my goal is to help people learn how to communicate, how to relate, how to resolve conflict, how to interact with each other, how to have deeper connection in their lives, then I don't know. I like the idea of getting people addicted to short segments. There's only so much time in the day, and part of me doesn't want us all to spend more time just staring at a screen. There's so much beauty to see in the world. And I think we do a significant amount of harm and damage to our body by sitting behind a computer or sitting behind a phone, just staring at a screen a couple inches or feet. This is the farthest I'll probably sit away from a screen, and it's maybe 2 feet. But like with a phone, it's merely inches from our face most of the time. I don't know. Have you thought about this, either from your work or personal standpoint? Like, how do you feel about other people getting addicted to you or to something that you do? And I use addicted intentionally to talk about the extreme version of it, because we can say attached, we can say dependent, but like addicted, where if it disappears, it's a big problem. And maybe that's the wrong term. Maybe addicted is too extreme, because addiction can often mean doing something that's really bad for us, but we keep doing it anyways, like something that gets in the way of our lives, but we keep doing it. Whereas dependency is more like something that we keep doing and it's necessary, but the lack of it becomes a problem in our life. So maybe there are two sides of a similar coin. Do you like people being dependent on you? How do you want them to be dependent on you? Do you like them being dependent on a specific thing that you do or have? What happens when that thing disappears? I don't know. It's just really exploring this concept of dependency and maybe I'm trying to plan things too much and be too intentional or too controlling. I can call it intentional, but it could really just be too controlling, and trying to control too much of what's happening in the world and in my own world, thinking that I have um, this ultimate power and control over what happens, but realizing, no, I don't. Life is just kind of a jumble and we move forward. I don't know why I have such a fear of people getting addicted or dependent on the things that I do. Maybe it's the fear that I'll let people down, that I have in the past, that, I've been an integral part of a team, or that I've been providing something and then I just stop because I'm not feeling it anymore. And then people get hurt, really hurt and angry and frustrated. And I've done this a lot when it comes to teams. Like, I'll be on a team and things will be going well, and then I'll start seeing signs that, like, it's almost like the boat is sinking, and I jump ship before the boat fully sinks. And people were dependent on me to show up, and they needed my help. I don't know. Have you thought about this a lot? Maybe I'm the one, maybe not too many people think about this. Do you think about getting people addicted or dependent on something that you do or who you are? Not who you are, on something that you do or something that you have or something that you created. I'm curious because it seems like a lot of business people strive to try to get people as dependent on their product as possible. Let's say you make a lot of money. You can make a lot of money getting people dependent on it. So imagine if Facebook didn't have any of the business aspects to it, where people are just on Facebook sharing with their friends. Yes, we can become dependent because we interact with our friends, and this is the only way we stay in contact. Like, for me, example, it's one of the main ways I stay in contact with my friends overseas. And so if I went to another platform and they weren't there, or I just left in general, I lose all those friends. So I'm dependent on Facebook because I'm dependent on those friends. But take it to the next level. If somebody has built a business around that platform, it becomes integral. Can't lose it. They talk about this a lot when it comes to programming and code, different dependencies. I think it relates a lot to pulling in different libraries. So if you building an app or a website or something like this, or software, often you'll have the code that you put in yourself, but you'll pull in different libraries, which are code, like self-contained code that other people have made that do specific functions. And so a lot of times pulling in those libraries will help you accelerate and do things that you couldn't really do, right? So maybe you don't know how to do encryption very well. So there may be a library that does encryption. You just pull it in and integrate it and it works. Challenge is now that software is dependent on that library. So if something happens to that library, if there's a bug in the library, or if people stop maintaining the library and just starts to deteriorate, then you're dependent on that. So you got to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, there's a library, but there's also things like API. So API is a application programming interface. So it's how you can communicate with other apps. And so if you're built like a client for Twitter, where you want to have a different interface and you want to use Twitter, and it pings and it talks to Twitter and pulls information from Twitter. If Twitter changes the API, aka the language in which you communicate with Twitter through the programming, if they change that, then you're in trouble. And so again, you're dependent on Twitter and the API. And then it's just, there's so much dependency these days, which can, I don't know. Maybe I think part of me, and especially looking at life in terms of minimalism for many years now, is trying to remove the amount of dependencies. When I came back from Tanzania, I went to see a foot doctor, and they're like, "Oh, you need orthotics." I said, "What's wrong with my feet?" I was starting to get some bunions on my toes. He said, "What's wrong with your feet?" He said, "Oh, it's just genetic." I said, "Genetic? That doesn't make any sense. You're not you don't know much about genes. You studied a few courses in medical school." There's the cynicism in me coming out, being like, "I don't think you're telling me the truth. I don't think you know the answer. Just tell me you don't know the answer." And then I didn't want to become dependent on having to wear orthotics in my shoes every single time I wore shoes. And so I started wearing these barefoot shoes. So I would go running in those toe shoes, the 5-finger Vibram 5 fingers, Vibram, and the irony is that I got much better at wearing those, and so I wasn't dependent on orthotics, but I became more dependent on those shoes. Like I don't want to run in any other shoes. And then they didn't even make the same brand, the same version of the shoes. They started making variations that didn't fit as well, and I was so frustrated. Oh, because I became so dependent on that one type. And so maybe one lesson in this is that no matter how hard we avoid dependence, dependence maybe is a better word than addiction in some ways. No matter how hard we avoid that dependence, we still have to be dependent on things, right? We are interdependent, and there's maybe that last point, the interdependence, that while I am dependent on those shoes, for example, that company is also dependent on me to keep buying those shoes. And so if I just disappear, they're in trouble too. And so there is this interdependence where, and that's maybe another thing that I've kind of pushed away, as if iPhileo had grown a lot back in the day, the more people that used it, the more that I was dependent on those people, right? So maybe I started getting a lot of money and I started hiring a lot of people. And now that I have more people employed, I'm really dependent on those customers staying, because if those customers leave, then I have to lay off some of the employees, or disconnect with some of the contractors. And those people are dependent on me, because if they're dependent on me to pay their house bill or whatever. And so maybe I saw that as it went up and up and up, more and more interdependence was created, and things in those, like if one element drops out, then it could really have a chain effect, a domino effect rather, of pain and disconnection. I don't know. Anyways, this talk helped me a little bit. Maybe that's one of the reasons I do these, to help myself. But I hope the video quality was better today. I am going to check it afterwards. And I hope this helped you reflect a little bit on the concept of dependence, and dependence in business, dependence in our personal lives, dependence in creating things. How dependent are we on certain things? Sometimes maybe the problem with minimalism is that we think we're not dependent, but we're actually highly dependent on certain things. Maybe this is the last thing I'll say. So back in the day, I had my laptop and I had this cardboard stand, and it was very well set up. I had a notebook. I had a external keyboard that was perfect. It fit perfectly. I had like the best mouse, everything. My setup was perfect. And then my laptop got stolen. They stole the bag that had my laptop. It had the stand. It had my mouse. It had the keyboard. And then when I went to go buy a new keyboard, the model was different. It used to have it was the Apple external keyboard. It used to have like a little cylinder at the end, so it would fold over. But now it's just kind of like a little wedge. I'm like, no, that screws things up. The mouse, they don't sell the mouse. They don't make mice like that anymore. It was a certain kind of rounded shape that I just can't find, and almost every other mouse really hurts my hand. And then again, for the laptop, they changed the laptop. So as going forward, they were changing the keyboard. The keys weren't as easy to type on, et cetera, et cetera. And so maybe it's just a fact of life that we are dependent on a lot of things. And even those of us who think we are minimalist and quite independent, we just might become even more hyper dependent on specific things. When I traveled around Africa with just a backpack and a small shopping bag, like for example, I went to a wedding in Uganda, and I packed my suit in my backpack, and then I had my dress shoes in the little, the like reusable shopping bag that I brought with me. And then it was, I think it was the day of the wedding that we were walking around, and we were going to get some food in the morning. And then the person I was walking with said, "What happened to your shoe?" And I looked down and I noticed that the heel on my shoe was falling apart. I'm like, oh no. So it was somewhat of a soft foam. And maybe I stepped on a pebble or like a strong rock, or who knows, or maybe it was just old and falling apart for that reason. But like it started to crumble, like it crumbled to the way where the heel basically fell off. So now I have one heel, up, and then I had one that was flat, and it looked horrible. And I have larger feet. We're like size 12 US. So like going through East Africa before and trying to find shoes that big, I could never find them. So I really worried. We went to this one store, and luckily I found shoes that fit. And like I said, I had problems with my feet in general. So I have a hard time finding shoes in general. And so I got really, really, really lucky. I found shoes in this store, merely hours before the wedding. Otherwise, I was in trouble. I was going to have to wear sandals or something ridiculous, or try to like create some fix to the shoe. But yeah, so I think maybe the lesson that I've learned in this talk, and maybe for you to take away as well, is that no matter how hard we fight it, we are dependent on each other and the tools in our lives. And it's okay to be dependent on things. Oh, there's a part of me that's like, no, it's not. There's a part of me that fights that. No, dependency is evil. You don't want to be dependent. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe just an invitation to explore your relationship to dependency. Being dependent on someone or something else, and having them or that thing be dependent on you, and how you relate to that level of dependence. I'm going to reflect on this more because I think this is a core thing in life that many of us don't think about too explicitly. So on that note, I am going to go because I am dependent on water because I'm super thirsty. We do have basic dependencies, huh? Cool. And hope you are well, and hope to talk to you tomorrow. Take care, y'all.